welcome to NTD China News. I'm Karen Chang. Making headlines this Thursday, May 9th. Israel's Prime Minister meets Chinese leader in Beijing. Why this director of the 2008 Beijing Olympics opening ceremony is being investigated. And the European Union approves duties on cheap Chinese solar imports. The Chinese regime has played host to two rival Middle Eastern leaders this week as it seeks to have a greater say in the troubled region. Today, Chinese leader Xi Jinping met with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Beijing after meeting Palestine's leader Mahmoud Abbas earlier in the week.
2 days after Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas departed, Chinese Communist Party chief Xi Jinping has met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Thursday's talks in Beijing focused mainly on promoting bilateral ties between China and Israel. On Wednesday, Chinese Premier Li Keqiang raised the issue of Palestine with Netanyahu as China seeks to play a bigger role in the Middle East. So far, however, neither China nor any other country has been able to mediate a resolution. On Monday, the Chinese regime issued veiled criticism of Israel as Netanyahu landed in China's commercial capital, Shanghai. China's foreign ministry said it opposed the use of interference in Syria's civil war. It urged restraint and the respect of sovereignty for Syria after Israel launched airstrikes over the weekend. Xi Jinping also reiterated the Chinese regime's support for the state of Palestine. During a meeting with Mahmoud Abbas, he says he believes the Palestinian people will one day have an independent state. In hosting the leaders from the two rivals in 1 week, Beijing has been careful not to jeopardize its trade ties with Israel. State-run media reports trade between the two countries amount to almost $10 billion a year. China also relies on oil imports from the Middle East and has an interest in ensuring stability in the region.
Last week, the Chinese regime was given a bad grade for religious freedom by a U.S. government body. The head of that body says that religious freedoms are closely linked to a country's freedom of the press. She has urged the U.S. government to address the Chinese regime's control of the media and support independent broadcasters like NTD.
The U.S. International Religious Freedom Commission released its annual report on April 30th. At a press briefing yesterday, the chairwoman of the commission said how important freedom of information is to ensuring basic rights.
Well, independent media is perhaps the single most effective means of promoting freedom, promoting democracy, promoting human rights, promoting religious freedom.
She says Taiwan is a case in point. After the Republic of China lost the civil war and fled to Taiwan, it eventually developed into a relatively free and democratic country.
Taiwan has shown the difference between a democratic society and an authoritarian, repressive communist society.
The Commission's 2013 report found that religious freedom in China has deteriorated over the past year. China was again on its list of countries of particular concern, highlighting the ill treatment of Muslims and Tibetan Buddhists.
Religious freedom and free expression, free speech, free press are intimately connected with one another. And, once again, we would urge our embassy, our State Department, our administration, and our Congress to press hard for these kinds of freedoms in China.
NTD Asia Pacific is having trouble renewing its contract with Taiwan-based company Zhonghua Telecom. Many suspect that the real issue behind the contract problem is Taiwan's closer relationship with the mainland. Swett says that Taiwan needs to be careful to preserve its national integrity.
And Taiwan needs to do what it can to make sure that entities that are trying to use the base of Taiwan to bring this kind of vital information to China are able to continue to do so.
She says if China is putting pressure on Zhonghua Telecom, this shows how afraid Chinese authorities are of independent information. NTD News, Washington, D.C.
The Chinese regime has a strict family planning policy. Most ordinary citizens can only have one child, and even then they must apply for a birth permit from authorities. But the rules don't appear to apply equally to everyone. And today, a famous Chinese director is facing investigations for going way above the birth limit.
Renowned Chinese director Zhang Yimou is being investigated for allegedly having 7 children. The Chinese regime has a strict one-child policy, but sometimes those with power and money can skirt the rules. Zhang is known for directing the opening ceremony for the 2008 Beijing Olympics. On Thursday, state-run Xinhua news agency reported that family planning authorities are now looking into reports that he fathered 7 kids to 4 different women.
The law in China is implemented according to the person in question. People like Zhang Yimou aren't restricted. For ordinary people, even after they get married, they need to have a birth permit to have children. If not, they'll be forced to abort.
Zhang is currently in his second marriage with actress Chen Ting. If he is found to have broken family planning rules, he faces more than $25 million in fines, according to state-run People's Daily. Zhang Yimou gained fame earlier in his career for movies like To Live. That film was banned by Chinese authorities because it looked at the disastrous effects of the Cultural Revolution. More recently, though, Zhang's critics say he has become more aligned with the ruling Communist Party. The New York Times describes his transformation as, quote, a director with an uncompromising vision, to one who bows to the whims of party officials.
The European Commission has agreed to impose punitive import duties on Chinese-made solar panels. EU commissioners have backed EU Trade Chief Karel de Gucht's proposal to levy the provisional duties by June 6th. The duties will range between 37% to 68% and are designed to make cheap Chinese solar panels less attractive. In response, the Chinese regime has called for talks to prevent a trade war between the two sides. Chinese solar panel production quadrupled between 2009 and 2011 to more than the entire global demand. Industry executives say they can be up to 45% cheaper than those made in Europe, and this has flooded the European market. In 2011, China exported $27 billion of solar panels to the EU. Chinese companies now have up to 80% of the market share there, up from almost zero a few years ago. The EU is walking a careful path, though, as it investigates accusations of dumping by Chinese companies. The bloc needs to pull itself out of recession, and China is its second largest trading partner. And coming up after the break, concerns over China's export despite gains in April, why Chinese people are setting up petitions to the White House, and a look at some innovative and creative Chinese inventions. And welcome back. China's trade figures have come under increasing scrutiny, particularly over how much the country claims to be exporting. With the export market constituting a major portion of the country's economy, weaker demands are a cause for worry.
Chinese customs officials announced on Wednesday that exports increased at an annual rate of 14.7% last month. This is an improvement over April of last year, when exports were especially low. China's General Administration of Customs says the increase this April comes from an almost 60% rise in shipments to Hong Kong. In March, regulators said exports to Hong Kong increased by almost 93%, but Hong Kong says it only saw a 13.8% rise in imports from the mainland. That's prompting customs officials to investigate whether some businesses might be overstating exports as a way to get around government currency controls. Wednesday's export figures also showed a drop in Chinese shipments to the U.S. and Europe. That's raised concerns over whether China's regulators are able to rely on the export market to boost the economy.
There is now competition from overseas. Labor and other costs in China are rising, so countries like Vietnam are getting an upper hand and are getting some of those export orders.
Over the weekend, at China's largest international trade fair, orders from the country's major trading partners fell. There were 12% less orders from Japan and almost 5% less from the EU. This follows a surprising trade deficit in March of $880 million.
China has encouraged cheap imports to move its economy along, so a trade deficit is unusual. It has always enjoyed a surplus, and now this deficit is showing that China's export market is continuing to shrink.
Taking into account that export figures to Hong Kong may have been overstated, one economist from the Royal Bank of Scotland told the New York Times that China's true export growth for April was only 5.7%, far lower than China's stated rate of 14.7%.
Petitioning to authorities is a long-standing practice in China by citizens who look to officials to resolve their problems. But there are constant reports of petitioners being roughened up by authorities and others who are detained for airing grievances. Over the last several days, though, some disgruntled Chinese citizens have found another way to make their pleas heard.
A petition to deport a Chinese murder suspect has attracted over 140,000 signatures on the White House website, and it has started an avalanche of appeals from Chinese citizens to the Obama administration. The original petition calls for the deportation of Jasmine Sun, or Sun Wei. She was the roommate of Zhu Ling at Tsinghua University in 1994. Zhu was poisoned with thallium that year, and Sun was a suspect but never charged. Many believe Beijing police closed the case because of Sun's family's political connections. With more than 100,000 signatures, the Obama administration is required to respond to the petition lodged under the We the People initiative. Spurred by the success, Chinese netizens are launching other appeals. One calls for the U.S. to forcefully protest an oil refinery plant being built in the city of Kunming. Another petition calls on the U.S. to invade China and liberate the Chinese people. Then there's this one, a petition calling for better formal imitations of Lanzhou beef. As for the Zhu Ling case, the U.S. government has not issued a response yet, but it did prompt Beijing police to make this announcement on Wednesday. Through its official Twitter-like Weibo account, it claimed the initial probe was done free of any outside influence. Police claims the suspect behind Zhu's poisoning was not found because there was insufficient evidence.
Rainstorms have battered southwestern China. It caused widespread flooding in Guizhou province, and this man found himself trapped in his home. After rescuers tried but failed to reach him, they used a rope and bamboo pole to create a passage between his house and higher ground. Xi Jinping tied a slip knot to the pole and managed to shimmy his way to safety. Afterwards, Li said the rains have been coming down for the past 2 days, but he didn't think anything of it until this morning. He said by 4 p.m., though, it was impossible to leave his house. Not everyone was as lucky as him. Heavy rains in central and southern China have killed at least 6 people since Tuesday, bringing down hundreds of homes and ruining farm crops, according to state-run Xinhua news agency. China once led the world with advanced technologies like printing and gunpowder. That spirit seems to be still alive in many Chinese entrepreneurs today. Here's what some Chinese have built with their own 2 hands.
China is the factory of the world, producing anything from chopsticks to high-tech electronics. But Chinese manufacturers sometimes have a reputation for copying ideas rather than being innovative. But there is another side to all of this. Meet China's entrepreneurs and inventors compiled by US-based The Atlantic. What can you do with a bicycle? How about turning it into something that helps caretakers commandeer a wheelchair? Want to fight air pollution while you cycle? This breathing cycle has an air filter attached to help keep your lungs clean. With the flooding in southwest China, this boat-bicycle hybrid may come into handy. Other aquatic contraptions have been built by farmers hoping to make sea cucumbers harvesting a bit easier. This contraption, though, doesn't seem to have a clear purpose. Some farmers have also built robots to use on land. And how many robots does it take to screw in a light bulb? Well, apparently just one. This man did not have the money to buy prosthetics or a robot, but he did create some robot-like prosthetics. This Beijing resident was a little tight on cash, so he made his own little house in the middle of Beijing. The Chinese people, once the innovator of things such as paper, gunpowder, and the compass, may again be showing their entrepreneurial spirit.
And that's all for this broadcast of NTD China News. For more of our China content, visit our website at ntd.tv or subscribe to our YouTube channel, NTD on China. Coming up next is China Focus with Shirley Zhang. Stay tuned and thanks for watching.